The difficulty is that self-government is under attack from the encroaching control of bureaucrats, of those with scientific expertise, so that the confidence you might have in setting your own direction politically is less than it used to be.
Professor Blitz, it's not enough for you to conserve liberty, to conserve virtue, to conserve excellence. There's yet more. You also call for conserving self-government as an important feature of what modern conservatism should be. What do you mean by that?
Yes, my demands are endless.
Well, yeah. In 115 pages, yes.
Right. You know, a central part of the liberty that one would want to conserve involves self-government, governing oneself politically and as a common people, rather than letting others do the job for one. And that's fundamental both to protect and secure one's rights, but so that one can exercise them fully, because paying attention to the common good in a serious way and involving oneself seriously in political affairs is one of the chief ways in which one exercises one's power and exercises one's virtue. So I would like to see as much room as possible for these kinds of activities, both publicly, but also in the less obviously public forums in which you deal with your own profession and your own professional life. The difficulty is that self-government is under attack from the encroaching control of bureaucrats, of those with scientific expertise, so that the confidence you might have in setting your own direction politically is less than it used to be. And one listens to economists, one listens to scientists, one listens to social scientists. The choices one thinks are actually open to one seem smaller and smaller, fewer and fewer.
Are bureaucrats a superfluous category, or in as much as they represent a kind of rational authority, a kind of claim to some kind of the science of public administration, as they used to say?
Yeah.
Or is bureaucracies something different from the other kinds of claims of expertise that you're talking about?
Well, some of it is a claim of expertise, and some of it is merely a claim of administration. The true claim of self-government is a claim based on practical reason. And practical reason is something that you see in Aristotle, and you see discussed in Aristotle, long before you have full bureaucracies, right, and before you have a kind of scientific approach to public affairs and public events. Practical reason is the reasonable judgment that you make when you try to exercise your virtue. Practical reason is the reason you employ when you're trying to understand your ends and goals and fit them together and put them together. And I would argue that practical reason is something that experts, bureaucrats, administrators have no more than the rest of us, and in some cases less than the rest of us. So those areas of practical reason are ultimately the places in which there can be an assertion of self-government, because the rational judgment that you can make about such matters as a citizen and as a representative are every bit as firm as what the scientists and bureaucrats can do, and ultimately should guide them.
In the beginning of, say, modern American politics, when the administrative state was under construction, the odd thing is that this kind of efficiency or expertise was sold along with democracy. I mean, democracy and efficiency, that in a way was the slogan of certain kinds of early progressivism, at least. What's happened to that project, which was for democracy and efficiency, and somehow each was necessary for the other, because the the will of the public was supposed to set the ends, and then here would come the bureaucrats, the experts, the civil servants to provide the means to that end. Both parts of it seem destructive of the kind of citizenship or citizenly virtue that you're defending.
Yes, that's right. Both parts of it are destructive. The parts based on the will of a mass public don't look at judgment and thought, they merely look at will and assertion. And expertise fails to really think about the connection among the ends and the true connection of the means in relation to the ends. In particular, the people's representatives and then the people themselves need to judge which things need to be done politically at all. What should continue to be done privately. The more that's done privately, the greater the exercise of responsibility and the greater the exercise of practical judgment as well. How much should be public? How much should be private? Those are matters that are not matters of expertise. So the result is that more and more, the result of what we have is that more and more of what could be done privately is squeezed out. Less and less thought is given to the way in which our various programs and policies help to foster a certain way of life. Individual choice is restricted, and the total effect is, I think, worse than perhaps even the early progressives would have desired.
There was a kind of belief, at least among some of the progressives, that there really was a science of administration, which was developed in Europe and needed to be imported to the United States, but taught to breathe American air and to Americanize itself to our institutions. But then they were in the process of changing those institutions at the same time. So it's the foreign element, the undemocratic element, the unrepublican element in administration was always more prominent than they let on, and still is.
Yeah, and many of the things that are done through administration, one might say, actually require much greater practical judgment than one might have argued and they might have argued, because there's much greater leeway and particularity in the things that you do. Think of someone who is involved in public education. How do you best teach? You need an awful lot of leeway in terms of how you deal with individual students, and an awful lot of judgment in order to do that well, which doesn't really lend itself to a complete notion of science or administration. Right. Think of a policeman on the beat. Or method. Think of a policeman on the beat who needs to exercise all sorts of practical judgment and presence in order to be successful. So there are elements of what is general in all of those activities, but there are also elements which centrally rely on judgment, just as the balance among those activities, which is what's most crucial, and the way in which some activities, schooling is a good example, are better done in some cases privately than publicly. That's also a matter of practical judgment, and that's what the heart of self-government is. The exercise of practical judgment, the assuming of your responsibility from a voter up through a representative, the thinking out of what you want to do in terms of the character that you want to develop and the liberty that you want to protect. All of that needs to govern whatever exists of scientific or technical or even bureaucratic judgment.
And all of that is statesmanlike rather than scientific in the sense in which you're sailing it. Yeah.
It's statesmanlike because statesmanship is practical judgment in the service of a full understanding of the way of life that one means to advance and to protect.